Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Rosa Worldwide Webinar Series. My name is Mike Reed. I'm the Chief Scientist at Rosa, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar. Please check the Rosa website for upcoming webinars. This is a monthly series. And if you have questions during today's presentation, you can submit them by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Today's speaker is Renee Myers. So Renee Myers is a QSP programmer and data analyst for Rosa. She got her degree in chemical engineering from Oregon State University, and she's been at Rosa for the last 5 years, supporting modeling, simulation, and virtual population development across multiple therapeutic areas. At Rosa, she's contributed extensively to novel methods for generation and analysis of virtual patients, several of which have been featured in past conferences, webinars, and recent publications. The presentation will be recorded, but Renee will be live to answer questions at the end of the talk, and I'll be asking questions at the end of the recording. Thanks, everybody, and we look forward to your questions. Okay, Heather?
Hello, everyone. Today, I will be presenting on using parallel tempering for creation of faster, trial-like virtual populations from multiple datasets. In today's presentation, I'll start by briefly discussing the motivation for this research. Then I'll move to a review of the 3 virtual population algorithms that will be compared in the analysis. Next, I'll go to the MapPK signaling model used as the case study to test the algorithms, along with a review of the data used for the virtual population calibrations. Finally, I'll finish with the results and a brief discussion for the implications of this research in QSP modeling and pharmacometrics. Virtual patients and virtual populations provide a way to explore uncertainty in QSP modeling and are used to capture the variability in real clinical trial populations. Virtual populations are fitted to match to population-level statistics for clinical trial data, and the creation of virtual populations often becomes a multidimensional problem involving multiple endpoints and dosing scenarios depending on the clinical data available. As the number of datasets and endpoints increases, the creation of virtual populations becomes increasingly more challenging, and simple methods such as random sampling or acceptance rejection filtering may require prohibitively long simulation times to find patients that meet all of the data constraints. To account for these challenges, more sophisticated algorithms such as simulated annealing, genetic algorithms, and Metropolis Hastings have shown improved performance for sampling of high-dimensional parameter space and for successfully matching to the statistics of population-level outcomes. Although these algorithms perform well, increases in model size or complexity and increases in the number of data constraints can still slow algorithm performance and may require long computational times to generate populations of the size of interest. Here, we propose the parallel tempering algorithm as an alternative method for virtual population generation, and we compare performance to 2 other established virtual population algorithms, simulated annealing and Metropolis Hastings, for benchmarking. I'll move next to discussing the basics of parallel tempering, as well as the other 2 methods used for comparison. This section will primarily focus on the basics of each algorithm, and then specific details for implementation of these algorithms in our case study will be covered in the following section. The Metropolis Hastings algorithm is a Markov chain Monte Carlo method used to sample values from a target or posterior distribution. A visual of the algorithm is shown to the right, where the top figure shows a series of Metropolis Hastings samples, and the bottom figure shows that the samples approximate the target distribution, shown in red. The Metropolis Hastings algorithm begins by generating a candidate value, x star, from a known proposal or prior distribution. The candidate value is then compared to the value at the current state, xn, and we then choose to either accept the new candidate value or reject, depending on the calculated acceptance probability. The summary diagram illustrates the methodology in a bit more detail. We start by selecting an initial parameter vector, theta current, and then sample a new parameter vector, theta new, and calculate the energy associated with this new parameter vector. If the energy of the new parameter vector is lower, which signifies that the new vector is a better fit to data compared to the current state, We accept this new parameter vector with 100% probability. However, if the energy of the new parameter state is higher, signifying a less favorable fit to data, we accept the new parameter vector with probability p. Parameter sets with much higher energy will have a much lower probability of acceptance, while parameter sets with energy that is close to the current state are more likely to be accepted. The simulated annealing algorithm is derived from the annealing process in thermodynamics. In annealing, a material is heated, and the temperature is gradually lowered to cool the material according to an annealing schedule. The simulated annealing algorithm starts by selecting a random move in parameter space, and if the move improves the solution, so a lower energy solution, the move is accepted. If the move worsens the solution, so a higher energy solution, it is accepted with a probability proportional to the difference in energy divided by temperature. In this algorithm, the temperature starts high initially, allowing for larger jumps in the parameter search space, and then the temperature gradually decreases as the number of iterations increases. An example of an annealing schedule, where temperature decreases as the number of iterations increases, is shown in the bottom right. Similar to the Metropolis-Hastings algorithm, the simulated annealing algorithm selects an initial parameter vector, samples a new parameter vector, and calculates the energy. In this case, if the energy of the new parameter vector is higher, it is accepted with probability proportional to the difference in energy divided by temperature. As the algorithm iterates from 1 to the desired number of samples, the temperature decreases, reducing the probability of acceptance for less favorable solutions as the number of iterations increases over time. Parallel tempering combines aspects of both the Metropolis-Hastings and simulated annealing algorithms. In parallel tempering, multiple MC-MC chains are run in parallel at different temperatures. The higher temperature chains allow for broader exploration of the search space for forming global sampling, which keeps the algorithm from getting trapped in local minima. The chains swap when new local minima are found or after a specified number of iterations, allowing the lower temperature chains to narrow in on the solutions identified by the global search performed by the higher temperature chains. In parallel tempering, beta represents the temperature parameter. Beta is inversely related to temperature, meaning that higher temperatures correspond to lower beta values. The temperature of each chain, in addition to the difference in energy, determines the probability of accepting an unfavorable move, extending the acceptance probability equations as demonstrated in the Metropolis-Hastings algorithm. Higher temperature chains, so lower beta values, therefore accept less favorable high energy moves with higher probability, promoting a more broad exploration of the parameter space. Next, we'll move to the implementation of these algorithms with a specific oncology case study. A published MapPK signaling model was used to test the 3 virtual population sampling methods. The model was adapted to describe mouse xenograft tumor growth and includes modules for tumor growth, tumor volume, SHP2 inhibition, and KRAS inhibition, which are highlighted in the model excerpt on the slide. The model contains around 130 model parameters and 18 dynamic species and includes representations of KRAS inhibitor and SHP2 inhibitor therapies. For the virtual population analysis, 14 model parameters identified as drivers for tumor growth dynamics were selected for variation. Published mouse xenograft data for tumor volume was used for the clinical data targets, and data was available for the untreated case, KRAS inhibition, and SHP2 inhibition. The data means and upper and lower bounds are shown for all time points measured in the dataset in the figure. To reduce the number of constraints in the virtual population simulations, the populations were calibrated only to tumor volume data at day 21, as the time trajectories were found to follow expected trends in data even when additional time constraints were removed. The algorithms for the other two methods tested, Metropolis Hastings and simulated annealing, were modified from a previously published implementation using a lipoprotein metabolism model published by Rieger et al. The parallel tempering algorithm was configured with 4 parallel MC-MC chains using uniform distributions as priors for parameter sampling. Each chain was set to swap temperatures following 25 MC-MC steps, and the parameter values following each swap were assumed in this case to represent unique virtual patients in the population. The cost functions used to calculate energy in each of the algorithms were modified to achieve minimum energy when simulations fell within data bounds for all 3 therapy protocols. Now we'll move to looking at the final results. First, we wanted to evaluate the quality of the parameter sampling for the parallel tempering algorithm. The posterior distributions of the parameters sampled by parallel tempering, shown as the orange histograms for each parameter, were compared to uniform distributions of the parameter sampling bounds, which are highlighted as pink lines on the figure. Reasonably flat posterior distributions for the parameters, as we see for most of the parameters above, indicate that parallel tempering shows good coverage of the parameter search space. These results show the time course outcomes for tumor volume for each of the 3 methodologies. The shaded areas represent the 25th to 75th and 5th to 95th percentile ranges for the simulated results, and the xenographed data bounds at day 21 are shown in black for each of the therapy protocols. All 3 methods, including parallel tempering, successfully covered the target ranges across therapies, showing that the algorithms all successfully captured the variability in the 3 therapy datasets. We also wanted to evaluate the goodness of fit for the algorithms. As the datasets provided only lower and upper bound constraints, the simulated tumor volume values were evaluated against theoretical uniform distributions for the data ranges. Empirical cumulative distribution functions were compared against the theoretical uniform distributions for each therapy to test goodness of fit, and goodness of fit for the parallel tempering algorithm compared to the other 2 algorithms was found to be reasonably similar. We found that all 3 algorithms showed comparable goodness of fit and coverage of the target data variability, which made parallel tempering a viable alternative to the 2 established methods. However, parallel tempering was found to have significant time savings compared to the other methods. The time per VP, calculated as the total simulation time divided by the total number of plausible virtual patients generated in the simulations, was compared relative to parallel tempering for each of the algorithms. The time per VP was found to increase by almost 10 times for the Metropolis Hastings algorithm and increased by almost 15 times for the simulated annealing algorithm. Incorporation of a parallel tempering workflow offers many benefits to modeling teams. One advantage is increased efficiency for creating larger VPops. As parallel tempering showed an order of magnitude reduction in time compared to current VPop methods, this allows for significant time and cost savings on project teams. Parallel tempering also allows for flexibility for incorporating additional dosing scenarios, combination dosing strategies, and endpoints in VPop calibrations, and the algorithm is designed to easily handle multiple simulation protocols and multiple model endpoints simultaneously. A final advantage is improved performance for sampling of high-dimensional parameter space. By incorporating a parallel MC-MC sampling approach, parallel tempering is able to efficiently perform global sampling while avoiding getting trapped in local minima. For a case study with a moderately sized oncology model, parallel tempering was able to successfully generate a virtual population matching expected variability in data for 3 therapy protocols. Parallel tempering also showed decent goodness of fit for all compared to other methods tested. Overall, parallel tempering offers a competitive alternative to existing methods for generation of virtual populations maintaining goodness of fit while significantly improving efficiency. This concludes the presentation, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Renee. Much appreciated. Good presentation. We do have a few questions from the audience. If you could turn on your audio and your camera. Okay, first question. This is a high-level sort of philosophical question. I've always understood simulated annealing and metropolis Hastings as approaches to searching a space for the point with the best value, so single value. Creation of a virtual population doesn't seem like an optimization problem, so why are these analogous?
Mm-hmm. So that is the true point, but I can go back to the slide showing our modifications of these algorithms. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. So the key change that we made to these algorithms was updating the cost functions. So rather than optimizing to a single point, we actually optimized so that the simulated annealing and metropolis Hastings algorithms actually optimized within the data ranges. So we were provided with upper and lower bounds for our data for the 3 protocols. And so we assumed that the energy was 0 when the simulations fell within the data bounds rather than the data points. So that was the change that we made. And so that allows us to do the sampling for virtual populations rather than just optimizing to parameters or to specific outcome values.
Okay, so rather than a point, it was a boundary, a range.
A range.
Okay.
So that was true of all 3 algorithms. Yep.
Okay. Next question is, have you tested this on multiple models? And do you know if these results vary with model complexity?
So the model that we tested was pretty, I would say this is a moderately sized model. We have a decent number of model parameters and species here. So the original metropolis Hastings and simulated annealing algorithms were tested on a much smaller model. So this only had, I think, less than 10 dynamic species and only a handful of parameters. So those are 2 use cases. We've used the parallel tempering algorithm for parameter optimization for a variety of model sizes, and we're still looking for more data to be able to test this with a larger or different models.
Yeah, in a typical model that we might build might be, say, 10 to 50 species or something like that. Yep. Okay, next question. The 2 methods being compared search a state space for an optimum each patient. In a VPop is a point in a state space, but we're not searching for a patient. We search for a set of patients whose aggregate looks like reality. And we are in a huge space. So I think the questioner is asking for a little more, the first question that I asked, a little more explanation so they can understand the analogy. Does that make sense to you?
Yes. So, I mean, these obviously aren't necessarily analogous algorithms, but we just applied the parallel tempering algorithm for these patient generations. So even still, we're still doing a search of the parameter space. And so we're still optimizing for reasonable parameter outcomes. And then each of the parameter sets that we sample represents a patient.
Okay. And you can follow up with this question or by email if they'd like more detail and explanation. Okay, next question is, how is the proposal function set up? Specifically, how does it deal with the parameter lower bound and upper bound cases for proposals?
So the proposal function was just set up using the prior parameter distributions. And so we had data for the parameter bounds, either from sensitivity analysis or just inference. And so we were able to use that to guide the sampling for the parameters.
Okay, next question. In the results, it looked like the posterior distributions were constrained by the priors. Is that by design, or was that an actual result of the optimization?
Yeah, this was by design. So we wanted to have the parameters fall within these ranges. So some of these were estimates, and then some of these were actually constrained by reasonable biology. So these are the outcomes that we expected. So this was the parameter space we were hoping to search for these patients.
Okay. Next question, how do the algorithms compare in a scenario where there are multiple biomarkers observable following their own empirical distributions? So rather than just tumor volume, looking at multiple other outputs.
Yeah, so this works the exact same if we're looking at multiple endpoints rather than different tumor volume outcomes. This would just look like implementing each of the different observables as the model constraints rather than the therapies. So we could run these with the same therapy and different outputs, multiple therapies for the same output, or a combination of both. So this just happened to be the data that we had. If we had data
Mhm.
for the additional model outputs, we could have also included those in the sampling.
And you can do that simultaneously. So for both of
Mm-hmm.
them, let's say volume and another biomarker or other
Mm-hmm.
biomarkers. Okay.
Right, so we can just set these up as different protocols within the parallel tempering script.
Okay. Next question. Did you perform any prevalence weighting for the virtual populations?
We didn't perform any prevalence weighting for the populations in this case, only because we didn't have data to constrain the distributions of the clinical trial data outcomes. So in the future, if we had additional data or more information on patient distributions, we could definitely modify the algorithm to sample as close as we could to the distributions and then perform some prevalence weighting afterward.
Okay. Um, how were the temperature values determined for the parallel tempering algorithm?
The temperature values were just kept at the default values for the algorithm. So most of the algorithm setup was proposed in this publication, Gupta 2018. So we found that with most of our parameter optimizations, these default values seem to work fairly well for most situations.
Okay. And how were the model parameters selected for variation in the virtual population?
Most of these parameters were just determined through sensitivity analysis. We also basically focused mostly on parameters that guided tumor growth. And so
Mhm.
those were parameters controlling this bottom half of the figure here. So even though other parameters were identified, we were basically focusing on which parameters drove changes in tumor volume, which was our outcome.
So theoretically, you could do all of the parameters in the model. It's just a more costly set of simulations, right?
That would be more costly. And then depending on the outcome you're interested in, that may not be a very good use of the computational time.
Okay, so there's some intuition involved, I guess, or data-based selection of which parameters to vary to alter to set the virtual population characteristics, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay, another question. There's a two-part question. One is, can we optimize for other than distributions? So can you optimize, for example, summary data or implicit distribution like survival data? Where you get a percentage of patients that survive or don't survive over a time course.
I think that would also be possible using the algorithm. We'd probably just have to configure the energy functions and then the final distributions that we're fitting to. So I'd have to think a little bit more about that, but that does seem like something that we could incorporate with some additional extra effort.
So the next part of this question, and this is something which comes up a lot when we develop virtual populations, is making sure that things co-vary in a sensible way. So how does this take, or how can you take co-distributions or correlations into account?
So for this algorithm, we're not really focused on looking at the correlations, although those could probably be evaluated afterward.
Yeah,
So
it could be a filtering function or something, right?
exactly, yeah. So that could be we could run the algorithm and then layer that on at the end rather than incorporate that into the structure of the sampling.
Yeah, but that's something we often say that you need to take into consideration rather than just a random perturbation of all the parameters in the model because things don't always go in the same direction in nature.
Mhm.
So yeah. Okay, next question. Given that the generated parameter distributions closely follow the prior distributions, is parallel tempering here used as a method to find out and exploit the correlations needed in the parameter space to generate physiological VPs?
Yes, I would say that's true. So this is much easier than trying to randomly sample parameters because this is more efficient in terms of lining up all of the different outcomes here. So typically, if we just choose a random point in parameter space, we're not likely to get values that fall within the ranges for each of the outcomes at the same time.
Mhm.
So that would be the main advantage here. But yes, that statement is correct.
Okay. Um, Next question. Can the algorithm results themselves help in variable selection? For instance, in the results, it looks like one of the parameters was actually sampled to a delta distribution. Would it make sense to start again without letting it vary?
Yes, actually, that is a good point. So it looks like, I mean, most of these show a similar flat distribution, but one of the parameters probably, in this case, this may not actually need to be sampled because this is pretty
Mm,
tightly constrained to a
right.
single value. So we could throw this parameter out. I think we've actually done that before in previous simulations. So that would be another alternative is to tweak the sampling distributions once we get a sense of how they behave in the outcomes.
Okay, if there are additional questions, we're almost at the end here. If people want to submit additional questions, otherwise, this one I'm going to ask now is the last one. Um, the behavior of the model is relatively simple in terms of the parameter of interest going up roughly linearly. Uh, is the optimization criterion trying to fit this linear behavior most closely? It seems there would be many solutions to matching a straight line. And so would this method work for situations where the aggregate behavior is more complex, nonlinear?
Mhm. So in this case, we're actually starting from a calibrated reference virtual patient. And so that reference virtual patient actually follows the
The
desired time
data. Yeah.
trajectory, yeah, of the data. So by starting at that point, most of the time trajectory outputs for the different patients look fairly reasonable. And so um, I know we're showing the shaded areas here, but pretty much all of these are valid time trajectories for
Mhm.
the patient. So by starting with previously calibrated or tuned values, we're able to get a much closer distribution to data. Um, and so that isn't necessarily an issue in this problem. And then for more complex time courses, I also believe that we would be able to match those behaviors as well.
Would you, in those cases where you have a more complex behavior, also want to start with the reference virtual patient that matches the expected behavior?
That would be the optimal way to do it. And then one alternative that we've tried is to just continue iterating through parallel tempering. So start at one point in the search space, run some parameters, and then take those fitted parameters and start another round of parallel tempering. So basically chaining this and doing it multiple times can get reasonably good fits to data, even for complex outcomes.
Okay, well, I think that's all the questions. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining the webinar today. We have another webinar coming up in January, so please check the Rosa website for the speaker and the time of the webinar. I'd like to thank our speaker, Renee Myers, and I'd like to thank the audience for joining us today. Thank you, and we'll see you again in January. Bye-bye, and have a nice day.